Hello everyone, I'm Alejandra Barajas Navarro and I'm a junior environmental engineering major at RPI, and this is
Peter Iasconi. I'm a sophomore mechanical engineer here.
And today we're going to present to you some of the chemistry and engineering behind cleaning up an oil spill. Okay, so to begin, we're going to show you a commercial from the Dawn Soap Company, and we just want you to think about what message are they trying to get across here.
To help save wildlife affected by oil spills, rescue workers have opened up a lot of Dawn. They rely on it because it's tough on grease, yet gentle. But even they'll tell you, Dawn helps open something even bigger. This year, Dawn is also donating $1 million to rescue efforts. Go to facebook.com, Dawn Saves Wildlife. Find out how the little things you do can make a big difference.
Okay, so a lot of you might have seen this commercial before. It's really sad to see all of the animals just covered in black with oil, but you might be wondering, why were they covered in oil in the first place? And from that video specifically, it's from the 2010 BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill along the Gulf of Mexico, which was an environmental disaster that left a lot of animals, like the ones you saw in the video, covered in oil. And now we're going to show you a video that'll tell you a little bit more about that BP disaster.
April 20th, 2010. 11 workers died and 17 were seriously injured by an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon, an offshore drilling rig located approximately 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana. The rig burned for 2 days, eventually sinking and triggering the largest oil spill in U.S. history, as oil and gas spewed up from the sea floor. The Deepwater Horizon had been drilling an oil well in 5,000 feet of water in an area of the Gulf of Mexico known as the Macondo Prospect.
Alright, so today what we're going to be talking about is oil spills, and in particular some common cleanup methods that engineers will use when these spills happen. We're going to talk a little bit about a new technology that's actually recently been developed that's really helped aid in these cleanup processes. And we're also going to talk about the different roles that different engineering disciplines play when these spills happen, as well as their impact on the environment. So to get started here, an oil spill is what happens when oil is accidentally introduced into an environment, usually being a body of water. And when oil is poured into water, it tends to actually stay on the surface. They don't mix very well, so the oil will sort of stay on the surface of the water and they'll stay separated that way. And when this happens on a really large scale in the ocean, this can be really, really bad for any marine ecosystems or for the environment or any coastal communities that may live nearby. So oil spills are actually a lot more common than a lot of people think. A lot of the larger ones, like the BP spill that we've talked about, kind of get a lot of the media attention, but a lot of the smaller scale ones comparatively, they don't really get as much attention, so people think they're less common than they are. But as we can see here with this little graphic, one of these barrels of oil represents 1 million gallons of oil that were spilled in one of these spills. And as you can see here, this LA pipeline spill, 5 million gallons of oil were spilled here. And in the ExxonMobil oil spill, around 11 million gallons of oil were spilled. And in the really big one that we watched that video about, the BP oil spill, 250 million gallons of oil were spilled out into the ocean. So you can see these are really, really large-scale problems that engineers are tasked with cleaning up here. And even the smaller one, just the LA pipeline spill, that's still 5 million gallons of oil, and that's a lot of oil that engineers are tasked with cleaning up.
By now you might be wondering, how are engineers cleaning up all the oil that's spilled into the ocean? Well, today we're going to show you 4 different methods. To begin, we have skimming, which is a process that uses boats and pumps to suck up and separate the oil from the water. So what happens, the oil is sucked through the pumps and it goes onto the boats and is stored in contamination tanks. From there, this process should be used within 1 to 2 hours of the spill happening, because otherwise it won't be as effective at separating that oil from the water. And also, one problem with this method is that the trash along the surface of the water can get caught inside of the pumps, and then it won't be as effective at picking up that oil. So now we're going to look at a second method called situ burning. What happens is oil is separated from the water and then it's set on fire, and this is done to eliminate that oil through combustion, and it goes up into the atmosphere. This is bad because when oil burns, it releases toxic and carcinogenic chemicals into the air, and if it's done along coastal areas where people live, it can expose those populations to very toxic materials that you do not want to be breathing in. Okay, so the third method is natural sorbents, and a natural sorbent is an insoluble material that can recover and just retain the material through absorption. Some examples include sand, clay, and activated carbon. Although sorbents are really available and inexpensive, one problem with it is that it can really only be used in calm waters, so it wouldn't be ideal in the ocean where you can have a lot of different currents and trash, and just it's not super effective. Okay, so the fourth method, dispersants. What happens with this method is it's basically a chemical that is going to break down the oil into smaller droplets that will then go into the water instead of just sitting on the surface. So this works so that the animals on the surface won't be as exposed to the oil. But one of the problems is that the animals, the marine life living within the ocean, will be exposed. And additionally, these small droplets of oil can sink down onto the terrain at the bottom of the ocean and then just be stuck there for years without degrading, which is a whole other problem. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of the chemistry behind the methods. So first, we're going to look at monomers. So monomers are made up of atoms. As you can see in this photo, the atoms are circles. And atoms are just the building blocks of everything that exists. You can think of it like Legos. You have one Lego piece and then you put another Lego piece on top of it and then you can make a building. Well, atoms are like that, where you can just put them together and make something. In this case, we make a monomer. And with monomers, you can connect them together with bonds, and it can make a chain of what's called a polymer. So we're going to learn a little bit more about polymers. Okay, so here we have the monomers, which is what we're going to make the polymers out of. And then we're going to go through a process called polymerization. Okay, and through this process, the monomers are going to be linked together through bonds to make what's called the polymer. And you can think of that process as like a train. Trains have different carts, and you can connect them to make one long train. And the train can only really work if all the carts are connected. So engineers can make specific polymers to do specific things, and this is what they can do to come up with new methods to clean up oil.
Alright, so what you can see here at the top of this slide is called a structural formula of a polymer that we're going to use as an example. And you can sort of see here, it's sort of a complicated diagram, but you can sort of see these sort of individual repeated patterns that make up this entire chain. And each of these repeated patterns are the monomers that we were talking about. And like the analogy that Ali used, you can think of each of these monomers like a train car. Like they're the same thing repeated over and over again. They can exist on their own, but when they're all put together, they sort of work as, a larger whole. And what engineers have done with this technology is actually during the BP oil spill, engineers at Penn State University developed this special polymer powder. And this polymer powder is really, really good at absorbing oil that's been spilled in water. And we have an example of this type of polymer being used. This is just a little oil spill simulation in a little pan of water. And you can see that as we add this polymer, you can see right away, even as it's still being added, it's already absorbing a lot of that oil that was in that sample. And then eventually what you end up with is this sort of oil polymer gel that's all collected on the surface, and it's really easy to remove compared to trying to remove all of that liquid oil that you had before. And this polymer is actually so good at absorbing this oil that the total time that elapsed from this first picture to the last picture was only 56 seconds. So it took less than a minute to absorb all of that oil. So this polymer is really, really helpful in these cleanup efforts when engineers are trying to remove large amounts of oil from the ocean. So the way this absorption kind of works with the polymers, you can kind of, if we think back to the polymer chains that we talked about, those polymer chains can really be as long as you want because you can just keep adding more of those monomers onto the end to make a longer and longer chain. And what you can end up with eventually is sort of a structure that kind of looks like this, sort of a really kind of complex structure of these interwoven longer polymer chains. And on a molecular level, these interwoven chains kind of act as a net that can catch these larger clumps of oil and sort of keep them in place. And this is what makes it such a good absorber of oil in water.
Okay, so now that we've looked at all the methods, we're going to see what engineers are involved in cleaning up oil spills. Okay, so to begin, material science engineers. They're the ones working hard to make new materials that can make cleaning up oil spills more effective. And then the next engineer are chemical engineers, and they're the ones who take the new materials that material science engineers made and then develop processes that make mass producing those materials effective, so we can just have a lot of the materials. Okay, and then the next engineer is what I am, environmental engineers, and they're the ones who employ and see what tools and methods can we use to clean up the oil spills in the most effective possible ways. So before we had seen 4 different methods, and some of the methods you could only use would only work best within 1 to 2 hours. So environmental engineers are just thinking about what method would work best in maybe like 2 hours into the spill, and then if it's already been longer than that, they would look at new methods. Yeah.
So next we have what I am, which is a mechanical engineer. And mechanical engineers design a lot of the machines that would be used in these cleanup processes. So kind of if we think back to the first example we talked about with the skimming the oil off the surface, the pumps and the boats that are used in that process would be designed and built by mechanical engineers. So that would be how they contribute. And then finally we have the civil engineer. And what civil engineers do is they design things like buildings and bridges and these larger structures. And in the case of the example we've been talking about with oil spills, they're the ones designing the oil rigs that break. So if a civil engineer is doing their job well, these oil spills won't even happen in the first place. So yeah, as you can see, it takes a lot of different engineering disciplines all coming together to solve these problems when they happen and clean up these spills. But through all of this teamwork and collaboration, you can end up saving the environment and saving lives.
Okay, hello everyone. We've now transitioned onto the table because we're going to be doing a hands-on activity based off of what you just learned. Okay, so we learned 4 different methods. Here we're going to show 3 different methods of cleaning up an oil spill. We're going to simulate it here today. So the materials you need to do this hands-on activity include oil, polymer, which you will get, cotton balls, a spoon, and then graduated cylinders, and water and clear cups. And also we recommend you have paper towels ready because this activity can be very messy. Okay, so the first activity we're going to show you is a method simulating skimming. So for this method, you're going to need a spoon, and we're going to start by pouring 15 milliliters of oil into our simulated ocean right here. Almost. Okay, so Peter here is just pouring our oil spill into our ocean, and you may or may not be able to see, but there's just clumps of oil. And for this activity, we want to try taking out the oil at the surface, and we're going to put it into another cylinder, which afterwards we're going to measure. If you want to get started, Peter. If you have any siblings at home, you guys could try to make this into a competition and see who can pick up the most oil. You can time yourselves. We recommend 1 minute and 30 seconds. Just time yourselves and see who can get the most oil out. And we're not going to really time ourselves now, but you should. So once Peter feels like he's cleaned up a lot of oil from the ocean, we're going to measure it and we'll show you the results in a second.
I think I can get one more scoop in here. All right.
Okay, do you feel like you've cleaned up the ocean enough?
I don't think I can get any more with this method.
Okay, so let's see, what do we have here? Cleaned up a lot of oil. Doesn't look like there's a lot of water in here. One of the goals, guys, is to not get water into the graduated cylinder. So let's see. You want to measure from the bottom of the meniscus, which is just like, there's like a little bubble, like a parabola, and you just measure from the tip. Okay, so here we have 10, 11, 12, it's about 13 milliliters, which we poured 15. So it looks like Peter has done a good job. Okay, so that's the first method of skimming. Pretty good job. There's still some oil in there, but overall, pretty decent method. So the next method we're gonna try is with an absorbent material. And here we're going to use a cotton ball. And for this method, you're just going to take the cotton ball and you're going to dip it into the cup and try to just get the oil and not the water. And then once you have the oil, you're going to just squeeze it into the graduated cylinder. So this one's really messy, guys. If you're wearing sleeves, make sure to roll them up so you don't get them on your sleeves. Okay, Peter, whenever you're ready. So Peter's just dipping the cotton ball. You may or may not be able to see, but he's got some oil in there. It's just squeezing it into the cylinder. Any opinions, Peter? Is it messy or not messy?
It's definitely messy.
We got it messy, guys. Okay, so this one, do you think it's faster at cleaning up the oil or slower, or what do you think?
I think it's a little slower. It's definitely less precise.
Okay. Yeah, so with the different methods, we can just compare which one's like more effective by how fast, how slow, maybe how much oil it picks up in the same amount of time. Just comparing the different methods here. And whenever you feel like you've cleaned up enough oil, Peter, just let me know.
I think that's all we're going to get from this.
Okay, so let's look at the damage here. Okay, so it looks like the oil and the water mixed a little bit, right? So let's see. It's a little below the 10 milliliter line. So we're going to say maybe 9 milliliters. But it looks a little mixed with the water, so we'll say 8.5, just for fun. Oh, okay, so what do you think? This method is better than skimming or not?
I mean, it was definitely more difficult and we got a lot less, so.
Okay, well.
Definitely things to note.
Well, if you're ranking them, skimming is winning. So the last method we're going to try here today is going to use the new method, which is polymer. Okay, so to do this one, you're just going to dump the polymer in the cup into our simulated oil spill in the ocean. So Peter, if you want to just dump the polymer in.
Alright.
Okay, and then you want to stir it up. So all the polymer can just soak up some of the oil. We're just gonna stir it a bit until we see that it's soaking up that oil. It's doing a pretty good job.
It is.
Polymer is amazing, guys. Okay, and once we've gotten a lot of the oil, we're just going to take the polymer. This one's really messy, guys. So this one's the messiest of them all. You're just going to take the polymer and you're going to squeeze it into the graduated cylinder.
All right.
And just try your best, guys.
Here.
It's very messy. And also try not to get the polymer into the graduated cylinder.
I'm failing at that a little bit.
Peter's just trying his best.
There you go. Alright, I think that's squeezed out.
So something interesting about this method is that it's picking up more oil than the other methods just with the polymer, but getting the oil out of the polymer is a challenge. So you have to think about it, like, although I might be getting oil out of the ocean, what about after the ocean? Where is this polymer gonna go?
Alright, I think this is our last scoop of polymer here.
Okay, so if you were to compare all the cups, this one is definitely the cleanest, the least amount of oil in there. When we measure it, we have around 12 milliliters. So, yeah, we got a lot of oil out of the water itself, but it's very messy, guys, so just try your best. But clearly, this one is the winner at cleaning up the oil spill. And yeah, any opinions? Any comments?
Awesome, yeah, I mean, yeah, you guys can definitely see. We measured a lot more from the skimming method and a little more from the absorption method, but if you can see the actual, on the surface of these 3 water containers.
Maybe we can show.
Oh, we can try.
Maybe we can show.
In the actual containers themselves, there's actually a lot less oil still left on the surface of the polymer container. So
yeah.
While we weren't able to recover as much, we were definitely able to remove a lot more from the water in the first place, which is good.
Yeah, that's amazing. Engineers are amazing, guys. And if you want to have fun, do this.
All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks for joining us, guys.